Hello everyone, welcome to China Talk. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, and the UN in China has organized a series activities and events to celebrate this very important milestone. And today, we are very pleased to be invited to join the UN Family Day. During the event, we have an honor to have the exclusive interview with the UN Resident Coordinator here in China, Mr. Siddharth Chatterjee, to share his story with the UN and his expectations on the UN in years ahead. As the UN Resident Coordinator here in China, you have been working and living here for more than 4 years. So what is China like from your perspective, and how has your perspective evolved after being here?
So, as a young boy, I grew up in Calcutta, in India, and next to one of the oldest Chinatowns in the world. So this Chinatown was established by the British when they brought Chinese labor to Calcutta to build a bridge. And those Chinese people settled down. So when I was born, I had Chinese as my neighbors, and we had Chinese food, and they would speak the same language as my parents would speak, the Bengali language. I was a young boy. My first pair of shoes came from a Chinese shoemaker as I was preparing to go to school. So that influence has been there. I mean, I grew up under the banner of Mao, Lenin, and Stalin, because that is how the state was organized. So it was a very interesting time to grow up in those circumstances, and I grew up in relative modesty. Now, having said that, I never realized that one day I will come as the head of the United Nations to China. So I feel very privileged that the Secretary General selected me for this role. My last 5 years, this is my 5th year, has been a voyage of discovery. Every day has been. I came here in 2021 during the height of the COVID pandemic, and I realized how effective China's COVID response has been. I was in Africa before that, and China's response to the COVID pandemic by providing PPEs and non-pharmaceutical and pharmaceutical supplies to support African countries to weather the storm of the COVID pandemic. But through the years, I've been able to travel to different parts of China, participate in different events, interact with people, interact not just with the leaders, but also with the common people. In fact, I've forged strong relationships and friendships in this country. So I feel that today, when I look at China and I talk to many of the countries in the global south, I said, what China has achieved, it's not a miracle. It is about how political will, how the right public policies, how the right partnerships were brought together. But political will is the most important. Without that political will, you do not get that velocity. I think China is a good example of that, not just lifting 800 million people out of poverty in the last 40 years or 50 years, but also in the last 10 years, how since 2013, over 100 million people were lifted out of abject poverty. China produces and feeds 1/5 of the world's population with just 9% of the world's arable land. Africa has 60% of the world's arable land. Can we work together, the Chinese government, the United Nations system, other member states, to make Africa the food basket of the world? In fact, agribusiness by 2030 will be $1 trillion worth. So it's a wise investment, it's a smart investment, and we will have nobody who's hungry. And then when you look at the entire issue of the green transition, I mean, 80% of the vehicles that are operating on the roads in Beijing today are electric vehicles. I believe this knowledge can be very easily percolated down. Today, it will be economies of scale will be achieved through mass production. So, people say, oh, China has overcapacity. No, China does not have overcapacity. China is at capacity to deal with what it needs. But now is a good time for China to share this knowledge and share these resources with the rest of the world. So I don't see that as a contradiction. I see this as the greatest opportunity to leapfrog the green transition. And one thing that we quite clearly need is China's leadership to make this happen. China's leadership to drive the green agenda. China's leadership on the climate agenda is going to be absolutely crucial. So my journey since childhood to now has only made me understand what a vibrant legacy and what a vibrant civilization this is. The future is going to be the Asian ecosystem, but Asia not by itself, but Asia merging with the rest of the global south. So I see huge opportunities here. But I would like to also say one more thing which is going to be extremely important, which is the US-China relationship. I call it the most consequential relationship of the 21st century. I hope the US and China, as two very important member states of the Security Council, must get along, because their leadership will also make multilateralism a success. And not just that, we would be able to overcome the multiple crises that we are talking about in terms of health, in terms of climate, in terms of conflicts. After all, who would have thought Just a few years ago, China was able to mediate a resolution to the differences that Iran and Saudi Arabia have. I believe we need more such initiatives. We need more partnerships between the US and China in trade, in commerce, in economy, in advancing peace, in advancing development. I think that the sky is not the limit. So we have to be ambitious, and I really hope that in this year we see more China-US dialogue, because that is important for the betterment of the multilateral system.
As the former UN Secretary General once said, that the UN was not created to take humanity to heaven, but to save it from the hell. And having been working in the UN system for many years, you witnessed many conflicts firsthand in many regions such as Balkans, Iraq, etc. So can you share with us your personal memories of these conflicts and your suggestions for the current policymakers?
So I've been in the UN for 29 years, and yes, I served in the Balkans, I've served in Iraq, I've served in South Sudan, I've served in parts of Asia, I've served in parts of Europe. I have seen human misery up front. I've seen, in Somalia, in South Sudan, in Darfur, where people are suffering, children going hungry, people dying from malnutrition. So I've seen this first up. I've seen the effects of conflict in Baghdad and in parts of Iraq. And the thing is that all these things, either you become despondent and you lose hope. But within those difficult situations, I saw that there would be UN families coming together, UN agencies coming together to provide the best support that they could, with the member states giving them all the support. This is why the spirit of multilateralism has only been reinforced in me. I saw child soldiers. I was part of a program of demobilizing child soldiers, children as young as 7, who were child soldiers picking up an AK-47 and being used to fight wars. What we are losing is our empathy and compassion. And I think this we have to bring back into our society. We have to encourage more empathy, more compassion, more understanding of each other. So I can also say that the Global Civilization Initiative is something I welcome, because we need intergenerational, but we also need an intercivilizational dialogue, better understanding, better harmony. And into that, we have to bring young people into this conversation. This is why the Summit of the Future was launched by the Secretary General, which was on 5 key areas. The most important one was on youth and the future generations. Our children, your children, their children, what kind of a world will they be inheriting? How do we make sure that we give them a better world? We need to be involving them in today's dialogue. They are the present who will take us to the future. I think it's an important time for us to reflect as the UN, when we are on the 80th year, to see how we can galvanize a new momentum, a new spirit, but on the foundation of more empathy, more solidarity, more compassion.
And this year marks the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. At this very important moment, looking ahead, what are your hopes for the future of the UN, and especially in light of the current challenges of the multilateral system?
So the UN at 80 is a very significant milestone in the history of the UN. If you look back to 1945, the reason that the United Nations was created was to end the scourge of wars, and that was what the preamble of the United Nations was all about. We, the people, will all strive towards ending wars. Now, that principle, that preamble still remains very current. After all, the UN's foundations was based on peace, on development, on human rights. It was all encompassing to make sure that the UN was able to touch humanity at every level. It was to advance human development and to advance humanity. Overall, as we look at the past 80 years, it has been work in progress. There's been challenges and yet many accomplishments. It's been able to feed millions of people around the world. It has been able to immunize millions of children around the world. It has been in war zones providing relief. It has been in disaster zones providing recovery. And today we have a UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, who's really making sure that through his leadership he is able to reform the UN. And that is why it is so important that the UN system changes and adapts to the current times, which is what the UN Secretary General is trying to do. So Mr. Guterres has actually launched the boldest reforms of the United Nations simply because we need to make sure that we achieve the vision of the Sustainable Development Goals. We achieve the vision of a UN that is fit for purpose. We achieve the vision of the expectation that people have of the United Nations. So at the UN plus 80, just last year, we had the Summit of the Future, which came up with the Pact of the Future. It has been a very significant milestone in the direction that we are taking. But also post the Second World War, we are also witnessing some of the most urgent and pressing challenges the world has ever experienced. We call it an interlocking crisis. We've had a crisis of health. The COVID pandemic showed how fragile human health and human health systems are. The COVID pandemic also reversed the economic gains that countries made all over the world. In fact, some of the consequences of the economic causes like the Great Depression of the 1930s. Then we are seeing a climate crisis, which is looming over our heads. It's an existentialist crisis. We've seen forest fires in the US. We've seen forest fires in China. We've seen major floodings in Europe. So we are seeing incredible challenges across the world with the climate. But we are also seeing a rise of conflicts. It's not just the conflict in Gaza and Ukraine. There are over 80 conflicts going on all over the world. So very important to remember that with these polycrises of rising inequality, more food insecurity, we have to do something to keep the world together. That is why the spirit of the United Nations becomes even more important, because these are global challenges which need global solutions. Global solutions will be found when countries unite in their efforts to fight the challenges that we face.
And China has played a more and more important role in the multilateral system. So how would you assess China's role in advancing and supporting the UN system?
China's role is most significant. What China has shown in the last 4 decades, since 1979, when it was a very poor country itself with a per capita GDP of $180, it has risen exponentially, lifting over 800 million people out of abject poverty and yet driving change so that people are able to live productive and healthy lives. This is what we expect from the rest of the world. So as a pillar of the United Nations system, China has a very important role to play, a very important leadership role to play. So as the United Nations and China, we are fully committed to supporting China's ambition of the 2030 agenda, China's ambition of having 800 million people in the middle class category by 2035. I believe there are incredible opportunities that the UN can find here. I want to take this opportunity to also commend President Xi with his announcement of the carbon peaking and the carbon neutrality agenda, which are very significant. I believe that China can show the way of achieving carbon peaking and carbon neutrality, not by 2030 or not by 2060, but much earlier, because China has demonstrated that through the convergence of big data technology and innovation, how it has transformed its fight against air pollution, how it is making renewable energy happen, how it is making deserts, turning them into agricultural wonderlands like in Kubuchi. So it's possible. What we as the UN intend to do is align our efforts with China's upcoming 15th five-year plan to make sure that all those issues that China is facing with in terms of the aging of the population, in terms of public health, in terms of supporting a silver economy, we will be working with China to ensure that rural revitalization reaches every part of China. So we see incredible opportunities here, but at the same time, we want to share China's best knowledge and experiences with the Global South, which is one of the things that the United Nations is doing to make sure that no one is left behind. That is the principle of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so as the United Nations Resident Coordinator in China, today we are celebrating a UN Family Day. It's bringing across UN agencies, funds and programs here. We are here, the leadership is here, the families are here. We've all come together to celebrate this 80th milestone. Yet in the time of challenges, it doesn't mean that we stop being hopeful. We have to be hopeful. And I think a country like China inspires that hope. And we also have, as you know, the 24th of October, we will be celebrating the formal UN Day that day. And we are already making preparations for that. It's going to be a very, very significant event on that day too.